Here's another way of looking at it. This is one that's much more close at home, you might say, than that. World War I, there were a lot of chaplains who really felt this was our big chance to turn society around, because the war was forcing people to make big sacrifices, pay income tax, but other things, voluntary, look after widows and orphans. We had war widows. We had a situation where, because in Europe most of the farmers were too busy fighting to farm, there was a famine in 1918 and 1919, places like Poland. And our grain surpluses did a lot to alleviate the problems there in that time. But there was still this problem of the system, the way we run the world, still couldn't really affect even the poor among us, the strangers within our gates, And so one of the chaplains came back and he wrote a poem called Indifference in the 1920s. His name was Geoffrey Studdert-Kennedy. Nickname was Woodbine Willie, because that was a brand of cigarettes he handed out in the trenches to the guys. But he wrote this poem based on Matthew 25. Funny thing. When Jesus came to Golgotha, they hanged him on a tree. They drove great nails through hands and feet and made a Calvary. They crowned him with a crown of thorns. Red were his wounds and deep, for those were crude and cruel days, and human flesh was cheap. When Jesus came to Birmingham, we could change that to Hamilton for Canada, it'd be about the same thing. They simply passed him by. They never heard a hair of him, but just let him die. For men had grown more tender, and they wouldn't give him pain. They only just passed down the street and left him in the rain. Still Jesus cried, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." And still it rained, the winter rain, that drenched him through and through. The crowds went home and left the streets without a soul to see, and Jesus crouched against a wall and cried for Calvary.
Yeah, it's one of those things you have to let that soak for a minute.
Yeah. When you've seen suffering and poverty and deprivation and been overwhelmed by it, the solution is not to distance yourself. The solution is to say, God help me and get into it, And it's hard. I mean, right now it's, working with people who are needing help. And this can be any style, any social class, any ethnic group. Most of the time, it's not a nice experience.
Yeah.
And yet we are often so stuck on being nice that we'll almost punish somebody who is upset or maybe neurotic or autistic or whatever, rather than commit to the long haul.
Yeah.
I remember a story where Peter Ustinov in the 1970s was dealing with world hunger, and he took the character of a rich Texan, and he said, "Why would I give you my money when I can give you my advice?" And that struck me as something that we could end up being convicted on if we're not careful. So there's the question: what about our indifference? Are we indifferent? Are we going to do anything about it? But more than that, how are we going to think about indifference? Because we need to, feel it.
Yeah.
And realize that we may have excuses that don't work.
Yeah. For me, I find that recognizing indifference, part of it lies in when I've found myself confronted with something, or like even walking down the street, say downtown or whatever, and there's somebody who, the less than people that you see walking there, and is your gut feeling instinct to try to walk a different way or not make eye contact, those kinds of things. That for me was like the first layer of realizing I'm indifferent to this person if I'm gonna, and I don't care, and that is not okay. So that I've always had a more a bent towards the outcast, the down and out side throughout my life. So that's been kind of a gut check for me. But I've generally really seen Western Christianity, at least I can speak about more, that turning a blind eye from the ways in which we can, as Christians, can be really engaged in making a difference for people. And it's not even about making a difference strictly just to improve their life. It's about like being Jesus to these people.